Hello and good evening. So, what's happening in the world? To see what's happening in the world, log on to datelinegujaratnews.com. We have the world headlines, the world edition of the hashtag DLG plus 2NEWSWIRES, hashtag DLG plus 2NEWSLETter. And the world news is mainly being dominated by the news from the banking sector. The banking collapse, which has started in America in last 3 weeks, this is the third bank which has collapsed today. Prior to this, there was Silvergate Bank, then it was Silicon Valley Bank, and now it is the Signature Bank. Most of these banks had exposures to the tech sector, to the people who lend money to the tech sector, that is venture capitalists. And what is this Silicon Valley banking crisis all about? Let me explain it to you in a nutshell. So what happened with the Silicon Valley banking crisis? Fortunately or unfortunately, this particular SVB bank had a larger than life exposure to the tech industry and the venture capitalist fraternity. And during the pandemic season, with the work from home environment, the tech sector across the world saw a huge demand. And that's the reason, retaliating to which most of the tech companies and the startup companies which were in this space, they went on a hiring spree, on a raging hiring spree. Equally, what happened with the bank is that the customer deposits of SVB were improving because the news which came was largely they were lending to the startups, the technology companies which were having a high time demand. And people started putting their money into these banks. So by 2020, the customer deposits were almost in tune of $40 billion, which shot to $200 billion in the first quarter of fiscal 2022. That is January, February and March of 2022. Same money, the bank thought where to invest. So they invested mainly into treasury bonds and mortgage-backed securities. And what happened? Valuation of the investment instruments started collapsing because the US Federal Reserve started raising the interest rate. Now you might think that if the interest rate has raised, why did the valuation of these treasury bonds or the investment instruments started collapsing? It's an interesting connect. It's inversely kind of proportionate to each other. I'll explain it to you in a nutshell. That let's say, what is a bond basically? A bond is an instrument where I put some money. Maybe a bond is issued by a corporate or a government. It's traded on the exchanges. I put some money into the bond. Let's say in this case, 10,000 units of any XYZ damn currency, which could be dollars, could be euros, could be pounds, or could be rupees, or could be Singaporean dollar, or Australian dollar, or Canadian dollar. So I put 10,000 units of currency into it, where it says that after 10 years, this will mature. So I'll get my 10,000 units back. I mean the 10,000 units of currency back. And on that, the bond says that we will pay this much interest. Could be 3.5, 4, 5%. That's called coupon rate. So that's what the bond issuer commits to the bond investor, and they pay the interest. So let's say in this case of 10,000, if the value is 5% of coupon rate, every year I get 5% interest. That's 500 units of a particular currency. So let's say at the end of 10 years, I have accumulated 5,000 units of currency as an interest earned on that 10,000 units of currency investment into a bond, and I get my 10,000 units of currency investment back. But if the interest rate increases, I would definitely love to move out of that and go and invest somewhere else, because that is a fixed investment of that 3 or 4 or 5%. If let's say investment rate increases to 7%, I will move out from there. And that is where once the moving out starts, the bond trading which happens on the exchanges, the valuation of that starts declining. What we saw basically in the Hindenburg report. The Hindenburg had taken a short selling position on the Adani bonds which were traded on the stock markets in the Western world. So that is how the bond market works, and that's where the prices started declining. So let's say whatever amount SVB had invested, that drained, that basically declined, that came to a certain value. And on the other side, the cost of borrowing had gone up. So these tech companies which had gone berserk basically in the pandemic time and hiring more people, increasing their costs, they suddenly started realizing the burn because the demand went flat. People started investing into other areas, and they had a kind of cost burden, and paying high interest rate borrowings was not becoming feasible. So the recoveries were getting delayed, and equally the venture capitalists who had invested into that particular startups or IT ecosystem or IT companies, they also were not in a position to calibrate their returns, and they also had to kind of move out of that. And that is where the collapse of the banking industry happened. I mean the banking, not the industry basically, but the Silver Valley Bank happened. So in nutshell, what happened finally was that Silver Valley Bank went bankrupt. The government has taken the charge, but the government has clearly denied that there would be no corporate bailout for this bank this time. Post Lehman Brothers is considered to be one of the biggest banking crises, but there would be no corporate bailout. So this is all about what is happening in the banking space. But interestingly, when the banks go bust in US, who is buying them? That's what needs to be seen. And the people who are buying, there has been a proposal to buy out the UK subsidiaries of the SVB by HSBC. That's the Chinese bank. So again, that debate whether the China has been working to weaken the dollar is really working out in that direction, that when the American banks collapse, the Chinese are the ones who buy them. And there are yet more banks to collapse. That is what Bill Ackman has warned. He said, I appreciate the government action, but there is a kind of warning tone which he said there is likely that still more banks might collapse in America. So are we waiting for the 2008 Lehman Brothers crisis moment again? Remember, I have been talking on lots of debates that recession is coming. Are these the kind of warning signs where on one hand, the world headlines are dominated by the news from the war zone of Russia and Ukraine, of Palestine and Israel, of activities between North Korea and South Korea, of US Biden administration increasing its World War budget to $1 trillion, of which accumulating $25 billion just for activities in the Indo-Pacific to keep China in mark. So this is all what is happening in the world, and such news headlines are all available on our website datelinegujarat.news.com, on our newsletter and on our newswires. You can select, cut, copy those texts, and if you want to read more and get more view on the other publications or what they have reported, you can go and do that on the search engines on internet. And there are some linked stories, kind of commentaries on a particular continent from US, Canada, Caribbean, Latin America to Europe, Africa, Middle East, Asia, and of course the world and the Pacific and the polar regions, including Arctic and Antarctic. So what is happening across the world, if you want to really see, read, try to understand as to what is happening in Indian context, we give a news wrap of across the world with the world headlines on datelinegujaratnews.com. Thank you for watching this video. We will also plug this video on our website as well as on YouTube, which would be a kind of highlighting the main event of the day and the news headlines. And continue watching datelinegujaratnews.com. Thank you.